It is Tuesday, February 19th of 2019. Tuesday. What is it I do on Tuesdays? Think about it. Guy's Daily Drive. Good afternoon. Late afternoon. Well, I've explained this before. I grew up in South Florida, where it very rarely gets much below 50, 55 degrees. And from South Florida at the age of 20, almost 21, I moved to Ohio, where in the wintertime I experienced really cold weather for the very first time in my life, and snow, and freezing rain, and lots of driving in snow and freezing rain, and all of that crap. Hated it. So I shouldn't say I hated it. It was something you got used to. It was something you had to deal with, especially when you drove as much as I did back in the day. Like, I was driving 35,000 miles a year, something like that, just in the state of Ohio. So when inclement weather would hit, you dealt with it. There wasn't really any choice. I had places that I had to go. There were things that I had to do in order to do my job. So that's what you dealt with. And then I was there for like 3-4 years. Then I moved to Northern Virginia. Now, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in this area. This was like 60s and 70s. Spent a lot of time in this area. I had a niece and a nephew who were about my age, and we would split. They would come down to South Florida for like half the summer, and we would be up here for half the summer. But it was summertime, but even during the summer at night, it would dip down, sometimes into the 50s, which to a Florida boy with really thin skin, that was really cold. But after being in Ohio, it really wasn't that big of a deal during the summer. But I didn't move here in the summer. I moved here in the winter. And it was an eye-opening experience, because people here do not know how to drive in bad weather. They just don't know. And it's not too dissimilar to what I ran into in South Florida as well, except that the difference between these two areas as far as drivers go, in South Florida, especially when I was growing up, you had a mix of people who were really young or really old. There wasn't too much in between. So you had people who had been driving all their life, had a lot of experience, but were now incapable, a lot of them incapable of being able to drive the way that they used to. Their eyes weren't as good, their hearing wasn't as good, they were a lot more timid behind the wheel of a car. And then you had the other opposite extreme with very young drivers with excellent eye-hand coordination, but with very little experience, and 9 times out of 10 stoned or drunk or God knows what, because that's what they did. So you had older people driving 45 miles an hour in the fast lane of Interstate 95, in the passing lane of Interstate 95, and then you had younger people going 75 miles an hour in school zones, and that was pretty much what driving in South Florida was like. So when I moved to Virginia, not really knowing what to expect, and when the weather was good, it wasn't that big of a deal. Everybody kind of just drove the way that that most people did. You know, you had good drivers, you had bad drivers, and you know, sometimes bad things would happen. Sometimes everything would be cool. But if you get the least amount of bad weather, and I mean even just something as ridiculous as rain, I mean just a little bit of rain here in Northern Virginia, and people lose their friggin' minds. They don't know what to do. And that's just with rain. When you get something like snow or worse, frozen, you know, here's a story. When I first moved to Northern Virginia from Ohio, for about the first month, I stayed at my sister's house in McLean. And this was December, January time frame between 1983, 1984. Come on, people, let's go. I don't know why you're all stopped. It's flashing red. It's not a solid red. And I worked at a place. It wasn't far from there. Temporarily. Thank God I didn't stay long. But it was over in an area called West Park, which is near Tyson's Corner, one of the big malls in this entire area. And I'd gone to work, and it was cold, and there was freezing rain. So when I came out, you know, this was like on a regular day, 15 to 30 minutes at most, and that's with traffic, to go from where I worked back to my sister's house. 15 to 30 minutes. Well, when I got out to my car in this freezing rain, it took me 6 hours to go just a couple miles, because people, number one, they were skidded out all over the place because they're freaking idiots, thinking that, oh, it's just a little rain, no big deal. And then they find out very quickly that frozen rain isn't the same thing as wet roads. Frozen roads aren't the same as wet roads. So there's cars skidded out all over the place. So those were the people that took themselves out relatively quickly. Then you had the other side, which was people being so nervous and so afraid that they went into panic mode, and they would just inch along, not really go anywhere, and a lot of them actually abandoned their cars. They actually they left their cars where they were and got out and walked to someplace. God only knows where they thought they were going to go. But it took me 6 hours. I mean, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning before I finally got home. So this is, and the reason why I'm bringing all this up is that there's a phenomena that happens here when people know that it's going to snow. They rush out and they get bread, milk, and toilet paper. Enough for an infantry, because there's going to be 4 to 6 inches of snow on the ground. And stores will sometimes actually get cleared of stock. And, and it's not to say that there hasn't been bad storms in this area. When my wife and I first got married, we were living in a condo over in Fairlington. And there was a snowstorm that had us basically stuck for like a week and a half. I mean, we literally could not leave. There was no place to go. The roads were all completely unpassable. Impassable? You couldn't pass on the roads. You couldn't go anywhere on the roads. So it can happen. But there's almost always a huge amount of warning that something like that is coming. So when it's just 4 to 6 inches and it's one day, and you know that the trucks will be out, and it's going to be kind of nasty for a few hours, maybe even a day, at most 2 days. I mean, the federal government will be closed. Most school systems, all school systems, will be closed. So for the most part, people don't have to go anywhere. But everyone goes into this panic. Oh, it's going to snow. Oh. That's what they do. They panic. So, another story. It's not just here that these things happen. My wife's family, she grew up in Maryland, but my wife's family is mostly from the Dunn-Irwin area of North Carolina. And her father had, I want to say, 3 brothers and 2 sisters. I mean, it was a big family, a lot of kids. And they used to get together twice a year. Once, like around Memorial Day, and then another time, in the winter, at some point in the winter. And when Tracy and I were dating, and when we first got married, we went to all of these. And one particular year, we were getting ready to go. It was in the wintertime. And we had Guy and Peter, they were with us, and we had an invitation from one of Tracy's cousins to stay at their house near Raleigh. And great, thank you very much. That's terrific. That means we don't have to spend money for 2 nights in a motel. And plus, we're there with family. So wonderful. Thank you. We get there and we settle in. And this was a 2-bedroom house. And I don't want to sound like I'm whining or complaining, but we were given their daughter's bedroom when there was like this one small bed in there. Not even big enough for me, barely big enough for Tracy. So Tracy and Guy and Peter had that room. Tracy slept on the bed, Guy and Peter were in sleeping bags. I slept out on the couch where there were these 2 dogs that were just delighted that there was someone out there with them and just wouldn't let me sleep the whole time. But that's not really what the story is about. The story is about the next day. It's the day of the reunion, which is going to happen at 2 o'clock. and then it's going to be over by 5 o'clock, 3 hours. There was a snowstorm coming to North Carolina, which was very unusual, and it was going to be a pretty bad one. But it wasn't even supposed to start until after midnight. So 7 hours after the reunion was supposed to be over was when this storm was supposed to begin. And as it turns out, it didn't actually start until 8 o'clock in the morning the next day. Well, we get a call from one of the organizers of the reunion saying, well, we're canceling it for this year, for this time around. And I'm like, why? And they said, well, because of this big storm. It's like, it's not even going to start until tomorrow. There is nobody that is going to be at this reunion that is more than an hour to an hour and a half away. We drove 6 hours to go to this reunion, and it was going to take us 6 hours to get home. And they canceled it for a storm that wasn't going to start until the next day. Well, I was not happy. And for the next few years, they still had these events in the wintertime. Eventually they stopped, they cut it down to just the one that was around Memorial Day. But I never went to another one of the winter ones. I was like, I'm not even going to deal with this. It's hard enough to do a drive like that with 2 kids and then have you cancel it for nonsense reasons. And that was just nonsense. So, left out the best part. When we got up the next day to come home, we were going to leave around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's when the storm kicked in. So we had all the crappy traffic all the way through North Carolina and all the way through Virginia that we had to deal with, and we didn't even get to go to the reunion. So yeah, I wasn't happy. Anyway, that's about it. So we got this big storm. There's a storm coming tomorrow, and we're supposed to get maybe 4 to 6 inches. 4 to 6 inches of snow, wet snow, possibly freezing rain. So it's not going to be fun. But at the same time, compared to what I dealt with in Ohio and what people have to deal with on an ongoing basis in other parts of the country, where this is like nothing. But that is the area that I live in. That's what you've got to deal with. Anyway, thank you all for downloading and watching Guy's Daily Drive. You can also find some of the stuff I do. I do the MyMac.com podcast with Mr. Gaz, the Gaz of the Maz, almost every weekend. We're coming up on our 9th anniversary. 9 years we've been doing that show. Next month. And I also do on Wednesday nights the Mac to the Future Go live cast over there on Facebook. You can find that under my name, or if you're a member of the Mac to the Future Facebook community, you can find it there live. If you'd like to help with some of the things that I do, you can donate, a one-time donation, which is fantastic. You can do that through ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/MacParrot. Or if you would like to become a regular contributor, which was just freaking groovy cool, you can do that through Patreon, patreon.com/MacParrot. any and all donations would be appreciated. And yeah, I think that's going to do her. I will see you next time on Guy's Daily Drive. It's time to go bowling.